The man kept to himself mostly, emerging only to buy food at the market or take long walks in the late evenings. The women whispered about his good looks, the men eyed him with suspicion, and the children avoided him altogether. But Rema, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Alien on Earth. The Harmattan wind clawed through the streets of Umuogodo, dry and biting. The small town sat like a forgotten relic, tucked between hills that seemed to trap both the dust and the secrets of its people. Rema walked briskly through the narrow, uneven streets, clutching a leather handbag and a stack of lesson plans. At 38, she was one of the most educated women in the town, a literature teacher at Umuogodo High School. She was respected, though the whispers followed her, the unmarried one, the one whose books kept her warm at night. She did not mind being alone though, not really. Her life was a careful rhythm of early mornings, chalk-stained afternoons, and quiet evenings spent grading essays by lamplight. Predictable, safe, lonely sometimes, but uncomplicated. Until he arrived. It started on a Wednesday. Rema was walking home after school, her low-heeled shoes crunching against the stony pathway, when she noticed a man standing by the semi-dilapidated Okezie compound at the edge of town. The house had been abandoned for nearly 2 years, its windows dark and yawning, its walls green with moss and faded paint. Yet there he was, a tall man in his 30s, his skin as dark as the forest soil after rain, a lean muscular frame and a handsome face that seemed carved from marble. His eyes caught the fading sunlight, gleaming with an unnatural intensity. He turned, meeting her gaze. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. Rema felt her pulse quicken as she hurried past, her throat dry. Soon everyone was talking about him. His name was Emeka, they said. He had moved into the Okezie house to find some peace, though he said little else about himself. I heard he came from Onitsha, Amara informed Rema and a few other teachers as they gisted about him during lunch break. The man kept to himself mostly, emerging only to buy food at the market or take long walks in the late evenings. The women whispered about his good looks, the men eyed him with suspicion, and the children avoided him altogether. But Rema, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She told herself it was a harmless curiosity at first. She started taking detours on her way home, passing by his compound to catch glimpses of him. Sometimes he was outside, shirtless, repairing the broken fence or chopping wood with an admirable strength. She would pause at such times to admire his rippling muscles and manly form. Other times, she saw nothing but the faint glow of a lamp in his window. She began to dream about him, dreams that left her awake and breathless in the dead of the night, often squirming with pleasure. But her fascination turned to unease when the disappearances began. Ngozi, one of the school cleaners, was the first. She never showed up at home one evening after leaving the school late. Then it was Chukwuma, a boy from her senior class. His bicycle was discovered abandoned on the roadside, the front wheel still spinning. Soon, the town was gripped by fear as more people vanished without a trace. 6 in total within 2 weeks. Some people blamed ritualists, some kidnappers, and others muttered about the old stories of the Ajo Umuo, the evil spirits that lurked in the forest. But Rema noticed something else. Emeka always seemed to be nearby when someone went missing. She began watching him more closely, trailing him whenever she saw him leaving his compound late at night. He never carried the torch, yet he moved through the darkness as though he could see perfectly. One night, she followed him into the forest behind his house. The trees loomed above her, their twisted branches clawing at the moonlight. The hair was thick and heavy, the usual hum of insects eerily absent. She kept her distance, her breath shallow, her heart hammering in her chest as she tried to hide the illumination of her touch so he would not realize he was being followed. She did not know what she expected to find, but what she saw was beyond her darkest imaginings. In a clearing bathed in pale moonlight, Emeka stood with his head tilted back, his arms stretched out and holding a lifeless body. Something moved behind him, something black and pulsating, like a mass of living shadows. It slithered and writhed, tendrils curling around his body, sinking into his skin. Rema's stomach churned as she realized it wasn't just touching him, it was feeding. His body shuddered as the thing drank from him, its dark mass growing larger and more defined. And as it did, the body Emeka was holding shriveled like a balloon, being deflated gradually until it disappeared, completely assimilated. And then Emeka's eyes snapped open, glowing an unnatural sickly green. Rema stumbled backward, her foot catching on a root. The sound echoed through the clearing and Emeka turned sharply in her direction. For a moment, his glowing eyes met hers and she felt her blood turn to ice. She fled, her legs carrying her through the dark forest faster than she thought possible. When she finally reached her home, she locked the door and fell to the floor, trembling. She couldn't sleep that night. She thought about the disappearances, the dark mass, the way Emeka had looked at her. She should have been terrified, should have rushed immediately to the village chiefs or vigilante group that had been formed to report what she'd seen. But instead, she was crippled by sadness and pity for Emeka. She did not see him as evil or as a killer. He was being controlled by that thing. She couldn't stop thinking that he needed help. The next day, she took a pot of freshly made egusi soup to him. She told herself it was an act of kindness, a way to understand him. She was scared, but emboldened by her love for him. He accepted the food without a word, his eyes lingering on us for a moment too long. Over the next few weeks, Uremma began spending more and more time with Emeka. They never spoke much, until one afternoon when he broke down in tears and began confiding in her. He told her it was some sort of alien life. It happened one rainy night. I thought I was hit by lightning, but it was something else that fell on me from the skies that night. An otherworldly creature that grows stronger with every human life it ingests. One day it will be strong enough to start infecting others. Don't come near me after sunset, Uremma. That is when it wakes up and feeds. He narrated with haunted eyes and trembling hands. He was a man trapped in something far beyond his control, and she was falling in love with him. Desperate to save him, Uremma sought out an old dibia in a neighboring village. The woman listened silently as she recounted everything: the disappearances, the creature, Emeka. Finally, the dibia told her of an ancient Igbo ritual that could sever the bond between man and spirits. It could be applied here too, but it was dangerous. On the night of the ritual, Uremma and Emeka stood in a room in the dibia's house. The air thick with the smell of burning herbs. The creature emerged, its dark tendrils wrapping around Emeka as he cried out in agony. The dibia chanted, her voice rising in a crescendo as the tendrils began to recoil. But the creature was stronger than they had anticipated. It turned on Uremma, its eyes glowing, locking onto us. She felt something cold and slimy wrap around her throat, and for a moment, she thought she would die. But then the dibia lunged forward, driving a silver blade that had already been worked on into Emeka's chest and into his heart. The creature let out an ear-piercing screech before dissolving into ash right there before their eyes, just as Emeka dropped to the ground, dead. But not before he whispered, "Thank you." Uremma cradled his body, her tears falling onto his still face. "You have killed him," she shrieked at the Dibia. "But why? This is not what you said. You said you will set him free. And the only way to do it is to kill him. There is no other way, or the death will only get worse in your town. If I had told you this, you would not have come. And even if you did, he would not have come with you." Uremma returned to town the next morning alone. The disappearances stopped, of course, but so did Uremma's peaceful life. Every creak of a door, every shadow in the corner of her eye reminded her of the man she couldn't save, and this brought pain to her heart. And late at night, when the wind howled through the trees, she swore she could still hear the creature's screech echoing through the darkness.